Ask away, yeah. Skywalker is amazing. It's not what you would expect because I remember thinking when I was first told I was going to get to record there that it was going to be like the Disneyland for Star Wars fans, which it's not. It's actually like a working horse ranch with a little fire department on it, and I mean, it's like in the middle of nowhere, and it's the most beautiful, serene environment you can imagine. You can take little walks over these little bridges, and look at goats, standing on the side of hills, and I mean, it's like peaceful and beautiful, and right in the middle of it is George Lucas's house, and then right across from that is this recording studio, like top of the line, huge room that can fit a 100-piece orchestra. It's kind of like, how is that there? But it's pretty amazing, and the players are killer. So, but we recorded the Old Republic there, but for the more recent Star Wars games, I've been actually recording in London. So we've been using the LSO, London Symphony Orchestra, and Abbey Road Studios. So. Anyone have a... Yeah, what's up? Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I mean, it couldn't be more relevant for what I'm doing because, first of all, I mean, there's a source material that I'm dealing with. So, I mean, Star Wars has an existing score that obviously I did not write, and one of the requirements is for me to write music that fits in well with the music that John Williams wrote. And John Williams is one of these composers that believes in this philosophy you're talking about, which is really understanding symphonic music, and he obviously has dug in deep and, really gets it on a level that I'd say, most composers working in film industry these days can't even touch. He's probably, most well known for, how well he understands symphonic music. And and if you look at his score, if you listen to his scores, I mean, there is source material for his scores as well. I mean, I've studied the music of Star Wars so much that I can actually pinpoint, in every single instance of something he's written for Star Wars, I can pinpoint what he was referencing in classical repertoire. And so, I mean, he did that, so it in turn, I had to do that as well. So, my background is classical music and orchestration, so I do have that same understanding, I guess, that he has, and it's kind of worked out. I mean, that's honestly how I ended up getting the opportunity to do the gig in the first place, is because I could demonstrate that I was capable of doing that. But it's vital for that particular job. It's been vital because for it to fit into that world, it has to be written in the same way that he wrote the original scores, which was obviously rooted in classical tradition. And I mean, he's a pencil paper composer, for example. I mean, he still writes by hand. So to get as close as possible to what he was able to accomplish with those scores, I actually did the same thing. So all of the Star Wars scores I've written, I wrote completely by hand and had an assistant who did, or typically I would, synth straight and, mock it up and use a sequencer or a DAW. I had somebody doing that for me while I was sketching everything out and scanning it and sending it over and saying, do a mock-up of this for me. So, I don't know, does that kind of answer you're thinking? No, not for me, because it's such a big part of my process even before I started doing these particular projects. Like I say, I mean, I think the reason I got on these projects is because it was suited for the way I already write music. So, not really. I mean, that's actually kind of how I prefer to write. So, is that kind of answer? Yeah, sure. Anyone else? Yeah, right here. Yes. But if you want to hear more, you're going to have to pay $4.99. That's it. Yeah, I mean, and Will, thanks for that joke. I knew somebody was going to ask that because it's an obvious question. I mean, yeah, sure, man, it's a drag. It's like we all put our all into something. I mean, every single person that worked on this project, from from the beginning of development, every artist, every designer, every voiceover artist, me, all the musicians. I mean, we all really put 100% or more into doing something that was really great. And, it's something, I don't want to say it's trivial because, maybe they overstretched by asking people to pay, for the loot crates or whatever. But then it was immediately removed. And, I mean, something I've always kind of appreciated about EA in particular is their willingness to listen to fans. And they actually, they have a team of people that read comment threads and respond accordingly. I mean, Battlefront 1, there was a lot of backlash because there were no space battles. That was like a really big thing in Battlefront 1. Or there was no prequel eras, or there was no, you couldn't play this character, or you couldn't play in the Clone War era, that kind of thing. And every one of these things, EA is like watching and they're addressing, and all these things were put into Battlefront 2. And people there was a backlash about the loot crate thing, for example, and they immediately responded to that. But it's tough because even though they're that responsive, it's sometimes hard to win people over that have already made a decision in their mind. And so, yeah, I mean, it certainly affects it because, we all put our love into this thing, and, something somewhat trivial kind of, put a cloud over it, which, seems to be dissipating a bit. I also read all the comment threads because I'm interested. I want to know what people think about what I'm doing, So I'm very, adamant about looking and seeing what people say about the music, etc. And of course, by doing that, I'm seeing what people say about the game. And I've noticed a turn, where people are, somebody will always inevitably make a comment like, "Oh, loot crates," and then immediately there'll be like 100 comments on that saying, "Dudes, they took it out, and it's a really great game." So, I mean, I think people are really starting to kind of come around and get past that little thing. But, yeah, sure, those things affect us, I don't know. I don't think so. I think what I get hired to do is write music for games. And if I do that well, then other game companies, developers are going to, appreciate what I did. It's not, I don't think a game company is going to say, "Oh, wow, he wrote a really killer score for Battlefront 2, but, some fans didn't like the fact that there was, you had to pay for, a Darth Vader skin or something." Don't hire that composer. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it has an immediate effect if, for example, the game takes somewhat of a hit because of, the backlash, and say, for example, there's a lot of DLC planned or something like that, and they're forced to cut back. That would affect me, because I'm going to be writing music for the DLC. So, on the given project, perhaps, it hasn't so far, but I can't imagine it would carry on to from one project to the next. So. Yep. Sure. Yeah, totally. Halo in particular, I mean, well, Star Wars as well, but Halo, I definitely did this because, to be completely honest, I had not played a lot of Halo before I was even offered an opportunity to consider writing the music for it. And so I wanted to make sure that I was doing right by the fans that, play this game. So I got really into the game. And I played them all, and I dug into the music, and I read all the threads, and I looked at what people loved about the music. And by the way, Halo is like one of these things, is a lot like Star Wars, where the fans of the music for Halo are diehard. I mean, it's one of the most beloved musical languages in the video game world in many ways. So I knew I couldn't screw that up, you know. So I mean, I dug into it. I tried to figure out what it was that people really liked about it. I mean, I boiled it down to a couple elements, and then I kind of expanded on it. And in the same way I was talking about before with what were John Williams' influences, I did the same thing where it's like, well, what was Marty O'Donnell influenced by when he wrote the first Halo score? Let's look at that. There's all this Gregorian chant stuff. So I went to the source rather than study, example, Marty's score specifically. I went to what he was into when he did it, and I got into like all this, Gregorian chant stuff, and it was like, what makes this stuff cool? What makes this work? And then like all these open harmonies and these fifths and fourths and sort of quintal, kind of structures and that kind of thing. And I sort of just made that a part of my own, vocabulary. So then when I'm writing my own music, I don't have to worry about, whether or not I'm being original or not. I scrap all that content that I studied and just do my thing. But I'm doing it sort of through this, this screen or this, using a palette that was, based on something else. So it's like, I mean, I made this analogy when I did a talk at GDC a couple years ago when I'd first done Battlefront 1, which was, I had two choices. I could either imitate John Williams' music for Star Wars, or I could adapt his palette rather, and then paint my own paintings just using the same paint that he used. And that made more sense to me because then I can be original, and I'm just using the same colors. That's it, So I definitely did that. I did a lot of homework in advance of working on the Halo title because, for obvious reasons, I wanted to make sure that fans weren't like, just hating me for butchering their beloved Halo music. So I wanted to make sure that at least I understood the colors. And then I did my own thing, and I tried to, just expand on it and use that same color palette. So, yeah, sure. Actually, in the back, because he had a question earlier. Yeah, I mean, I'll give an example using Battlefront because Battlefront's a game where I worked extremely closely with the lead sound designer for the game, and this guy Ben Mento, and he's the audio lead at DICE, the developing company that did Battlefront 1 and one of the developing companies on Battlefront 2, and we worked really closely together because he was overseeing not only the music, but primarily the sound design. So we had a lot of conversations about frequency ranges and, will the music clash if we have this kind of explosion happening during this action scene? Am I getting in the way, or is the sound effect getting in the way? Which is more important for the emotional impact of this moment? So we had a lot of those conversations, almost like you would with a film director. And I thought that was a really cool opportunity because, I've worked on plenty of games, and I'd say most of the time it's kind of like everything's very compartmentalized. So a composer's hired, they go off, they write music. There's an audio, there's a sound design department, and they're all doing sound effects. And then at the end, it all comes together, it gets put in, and gets sent out into the world. And, somebody does a sound mix, and most of the time the music is just going to get ducked way down in the mix because it's getting in the way of whatever. With Battlefront, that wasn't the case at all. It was actually really cool because, first of all, we had source material. The movies were our source. That was our sort of Bible, so to speak. It needed to feel like the movies. And so the music is mixed at a certain level for these films. So that helped a lot sort of guide us, With Halo, we had a very different approach, which was an adaptive audio system that would, based on where you were in a scene, even like physical proximity, because Halo Wars 2, for example, is you're looking almost like an aerial view down on the battlefield. The further you pull away, the more it becomes about the music and the less it becomes about sound effects, which were diegetic. So the closer you were, the more in the battle you were, the more diegetic explosions and gunfire and, you know, tanks and that kind of thing you'd hear. And the music would actually adapt to that and then strip out layers, so it would come down to just like a very base layer, so it wouldn't get in the way. And as you'd pull away from the scene, it would add in more music layers, the sound effects would dip down, and then it'd become about score, because it's like almost a more emotional thing when you're looking down in this aerial view, this like, you know, more global scope on what's happening. It's more about the emotion. So, you know, it varies from game to game, I guess. Yep. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the first part. It's collaborative. You know, for Halo, it was extremely collaborative, and almost to the point where not one thing was recorded before the whole concept was proofed out and tested in games. So, you know, in many cases, I had an idea, like, what if we did this, you know, and then we'd try it out just using the mock-ups. And, you know, it's like, oh, it doesn't really work. I mean, it's still getting in the way of this thing. Okay, well, what if we tried this? What if we ducked this layer out? You know, because it's competing with the sub-frequencies of an explosion or whatever. Like, the first thing that goes away is the, you know, the sub. Let's try that. And it's like, oh, that worked, because now you can still hear music and the explosions still feel really big and solid. So it was a lot of back and forth. With Battlefront, it was more predetermined because like I said, because we had the films as our sort of example. You know, it's like we know exactly where everything fits. With Battlefront, music is never anything more than stereo, because in the films it's stereo. The surrounds and the sub is for sound effects, and that's it. And the center channel's for dialogue. Period. So we followed that model strictly. So music was recorded in stereo, mixed in stereo, delivered in stereo. That's it. No stems, no layers of any type, because for it to sound like Star Wars, it had to be like the way John Williams composed his scores, which was, I mean, and he's very sort of old-fashioned in a lot of ways in the way he records his scores. He actually has the whole orchestra in the room at the same time, which is strangely not as common as you would think. So we recorded that score exactly like that. It's all 100 players in the room at the same time. That's it. You know, no, you're not going to get just the brass layer and then just the string layer, etc. So on Halo, it was different because we did stripe a lot so that we could build that adaptive system. So, anyone else? Go ahead. Will's had too many questions already. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, everything about this industry is relationships, and you know, if you have a good working relationship with certain aspect of the production, then you keep it. You know, so there's that first of all. But then again, not everyone's perfect for every gig. You know, I mean, with Star Wars, I had a hard time choosing sort of a team. And because it was so overwhelming, the amount of pressure that was being put on me for it to be as good as what John Williams had written for the films, that I actually stripped away a lot of responsibility from other people and took it on myself, because I knew, well, at least I'm in control of it now. You know, so I orchestrated it myself. You know, I even was like trying to do all the, you know, music preparation myself at one point, and was like, screw this, finally I'll hire a copyist to handle this. But, you know, in the beginning I was like, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to mix it, I'm going to do this. You know, I wanted to handle all of it, because I didn't want to, because the second you let go of something, you let go of the, sort of a bit of the quality control. I mean, you can still micromanage, but that's about it. But by doing that, I quickly realized I needed certain people that were better at certain roles than I was to handle these roles. So I started finding the right people and building these relationships. And I did. I built a team, that's about 15 people deep for Battlefront, for example. It's like 15 key players on my team that make that score happen. And from Battlefront 1 to Battlefront 2, I changed nothing because it was like, it worked. Why would I change that? Halo was different because I came onto a project that already had sort of an established team. So when I came onto that project, it was like, hey man, you're the composer. We've already got everything else in place for you. We already have an orchestrator for you. We already have your mixer. We already have this. It's like, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't, it's like, I'm used to working a different way. It was extremely hard, and so I fought it, and I won a couple battles. It's like, well, first thing, I don't want anyone orchestrating it. I'll fight that one to the end. I'm going to do that because, I fancy myself as good of an orchestrator as I am a composer. So it's like, I just can't even, maybe I'm a better orchestrator than I am a composer. It's just a part of my process that I really just can't see letting go of. I don't see the difference, between composing and orchestrating. It's like the idea of hearing something in your head not orchestrated, it's foreign to me. So I couldn't let that go, but I was willing to let go of, who was mixing it. And by doing so, I was introduced to somebody new that did an absolutely amazing job, and we became really close friends. And that was actually like one of the things I changed in Battlefront 2. I was like, well, you did such a great job on this, and we had this relationship, and now we're working together already on this other project. Let's keep that aspect the same. So I brought this mixer onto Battlefront 2 as an example. But I mean, I try to keep the team pretty tight, So. Yeah.
So I read somewhere a ways back that
Mm-hmm.
when you first started doing phone was not a day went by that you emails trash like you think you should.
Well, that's funny you say that. I would say that honestly, to be honest, not really. I mean, I've mostly what I see people say or what people email me or, Facebook message me or whatever is like praise, which is flattering, and I'm happy about that. The one example of what you're talking about was when I had finished Battlefront 1, maybe a week or so before it came out, the music accidentally leaked, and it made it onto YouTube from the beta. Somebody stripped all, mined all the music out of the beta and put it on YouTube, and so now it's everywhere. And all the comments were, "Oh my God, the score to The Force Awakens leaks on YouTube. It's the greatest John Williams score ever. You should check it out." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I wrote this," and I can't say a word because I'm not allowed to even announce that I've written the music until the game comes out. And so I'm seeing all this, and it's driving me nuts because I want to just tell everyone I did that, And then the second I announced that I did it, then all those people that were saying how much they loved John Williams' new Force Awakens score turned and were like, "Oh, what an imitator, what a rip-off artist." And it's like, oh my God, you may be kidding me, man. How do you win, So, I mean, yeah. I mean, so a little bit, but, the diehard music people, the people that like actually check out music in games, I mean, that's been mostly positive response. So, good question though. I imagine you've experienced similar. Of course, man. Of course. I mean, yeah, there's definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that out there, but I mean, I try my best to ignore that stuff and just look at, I mean, you have to look who's making the statement, you know what I mean? And there's certain opinions I trust, and Exactly. Yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, you had one. Go. Yeah, that's a good question. So the very first game I ever scored was this game called Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings. And I got hired to do this thing because, I had a good friend from college that worked at LucasArts, Jesse Harlan, and I had just finished writing the score for this 5-minute Star Wars fan film called Ryan versus Dorkman, and it got really popular on YouTube, whatever, 10 or more years ago, before it was like nothing to have like 5 million views. I mean, now I could post a video of me walking down the street and it's going to get 5 million views or whatever. But like back then, getting 5 million views meant you just did something. And so it got popular. And Jesse had asked me if I ever thought about writing for video games. And I'm like, yes. He's like, well, there's this Indiana Jones game and, we're looking for somebody. And so I sent in the music that I'd done for this and, ended up getting the job. And because it was so stressful in many ways, because it was my first game, it was some big shoes to fill. I mean, I actually did. I'll be completely honest. Like that score, I was like, I'm just gonna do John Williams, as best as I can do. And so I studied exactly how he would write something, and I just essentially, I don't want to say ripped off, but I was like, if it strays a bit from what John Williams would do, I'm not doing it. I want to make sure that Indiana Jones fans, I want them to think that John Williams scored it. That was the goal. And but then the Old Republic was a very different approach because, I didn't want to do that again because it wasn't as fun as I hoped it would be, just trying to be somebody else. So for the Old Republic, I actually tried to branch out a lot more and kind of do my own thing. And because of the time period that the Old Republic was set in, it kind of lent itself to being able to branch away from the Williams stuff a bit more. And so all of us, like everyone that was involved on that project, was able to sort of, create something new and unique within the Star Wars universe. But, because it was set, thousands of years before the franchise that we know in the films, it's like this could be the sort of, the Renaissance music of, Star Wars music, compared to like, whatever contemporary orchestral music. And so we kind of could do anything, as you know. I mean, and we did, and it was kind of cool. And then the next one in line was Star Wars, Connect Star Wars, and then that was based on the prequels. And the prequels, in my opinion, are the best scores that John Williams has ever written. I'm still just blown away by the craftsmanship there. And so I saw an opportunity just to study the orchestration. And so I did my own thing, but orchestrating it the way he would. Not writing it the way he would, but orchestrating it the way he would. So that was a slightly different approach. Battlefront 1, the approach was, the actual request when I got hired was, we want you to write the B-side to the original A New Hope album that came out in 1977. We want it to be like John Williams wrote the score, but it's the cues you never heard. But in that era, the original 70s scores. So the goal there was dig into those old scores, which was very different than the prequels. So it was like, oh man, I got to study this. And he approached them very differently. And then Battlefront 2 was like, well, now everything's in the game now. Every era of The Force Awakens, Last Jedi's in the game. Everything's in the game now. So it's like anything goes. Rogue One, it's like Rogue One is a part of the game. So it's not even all John Williams anymore. So I just saw that as an opportunity to say, screw it, I'm doing my own thing, and which is basically what I did. Nope. But when I was working on the Rogue One expansion for Battlefront 1, I did get the opportunity to see a 45-minute cut of the film about a year in advance of it coming out, which was really tough in my household because my wife is a huge Star Wars fan and it was like just, constantly poking to get, info. And I'm like, nope, not saying a word. I actually read a script for Force Awakens about 6 months in advance of that film too. So I knew some. Anyone in the room not seen The Force Awakens? You should go see it. It's actually pretty good. Well, there's a major plot point in that movie that I knew about well in advance, and I had to keep that freaking plot point secret from my wife. And then when we did go to the premiere of it, which was awesome, and she's sitting in the theater, and then during this major plot point, what happened, and she looked at me and was so pissed. She's like, "You knew that was going to happen and you didn't prep me?" I'm like, "Sorry, NDA, Nothing I can do." Yeah. They never come back. Yeah, I mean, they come to me. I mean, I've had like 3 or 4 musical ideas while I'm sitting here blabbing, and they're already gone, and they'll never be back. But I have methods for that. I mean, I have lots of weird, crazy methods. I mean, a lot of my ideas come to me in like really odd places. I play tennis as like one of my main hobbies, and I tend to get a lot of my best musical ideas while I'm playing tennis, and there's like absolutely nothing I can do to get it on paper or on a recording during those moments. So I'll walk off to the sideline and pick up my phone and sing it. I get ideas in the shower. I actually have waterproof paper and like a wax pencil, and I sketch out ideas when I'm in the shower. I mean, just anything you can do to get those things down before they're gone, because when they are gone, they're gone forever. I hope it's pretty common. Otherwise, there's something potentially wrong with me. But I have musical ideas all the time, and they pretty much go away, instantly. Unless sometimes they're, and here's the thing, when I think I have a really good idea, it's when it doesn't go away. That's when I'm like, oh, I think I'm onto something here. Like, if I can't get my own little theme out of my head, then it's probably a pretty good theme, And those are the ones that I usually try to latch on to. So, yep. Yeah, I mean, I always try to do something unique for each character or each setting. I mean, with Star Wars in particular, because that's something that John Williams always does. I mean, like every setting in the Star Wars universe has a sound. Tatooine has a sound. Granted, it might be 75 to 90% based on the Rite of Spring, but it has a sound. So I always try to do that. Characters even more so, because that's something that's such a big part of what John Williams does, is this leitmotif idea of every character has a theme. And with Battlefront, actually what was really cool about working on Battlefront is the fact that there were many characters that were playable heroes in the game that John didn't write a theme for. There is no Chewbacca theme. There is no Greedo theme, because these were, Chewbacca's a major character, but Greedo, for example, he was in the movie for, like 2 minutes and then gone, that was it. So he didn't write a theme for him. So I was like, okay, now I have to write this theme for this character, and what can I do to make it unique? And I always try to do something to add some kind of character to it. Like for Greedo, as an example, I wanted it to be like this kind of weaselly, kind of slimy sounding thing. So I used like stopped French horns and to play the theme, and like trumpets with like tight straight mutes and that kind of thing to kind of get this whiny kind of nasally thing. And came up with this theme that I thought was somewhat weaselly. And and then there's a planet in Battlefront 2 called Pelio, where there's, on the planet's surface itself, there's these giant holes, and there's these winds that blow over the holes and create almost like a flute kind of sound. It's like when the wind is blowing over these holes, it kind of creates this hollow sound. So I wanted to do something that kind of emulated that quality. So that theme has all of these like overblown flute harmonics that kind of create that same effect. And then I had 8 percussionists in the orchestra, and I made all of them take 2 whirly tubes of different sizes and swing them around. So I had 16 whirly tubes going in Abbey Road Studios, creating this whoosh, kind of effect, and it was super cool. And so I sampled that and like built that into the theme, and so yes, I mean I always try to do something unique to differentiate settings and characters. Yep. There's a genre that I would like to work in more that I've only barely touched the surface of, but honestly, it was the thing I wanted to do most when I first got into composing, and that's writing for horror films. I love really bad B horror movies. I always have since I was a kid. I mean, I would like sneak away and like not tell my parents I was watching Halloween when I was like 7 years old, and and those are like, I mean, I love them. So before I got into games, I was like scratching the surface of getting into being like the horror film composer, and then video games took over my life. So yes, that would be it, if anything. I've never scored a romantic comedy, but I've always wanted to, because I also have a jazz background, and I think the harmonic language of jazz kind of lends itself well to like good romantic themes. So that'd be another thing I'd be interested in doing. So, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Not so much on the Star Wars titles. I mean, I've been kind of pretty fortunate in that most of the stuff I do there gets approved. But in every other thing, not as much. And I mean, the thing is, like, look, there's the bigger the project, the more cooks in the kitchen, and film even more so than games, honestly, in my experience, because I've worked on a lot of films too, and I always find that when you have a director and 2 producers, and then a post-production supervisor and a music editor, and everyone has an opinion on what this music's supposed to be, and there's no possible way for them to all be right. And at the end of the day, who should really be right, honestly, is the composer, although often that's a battle that's lost. But I always fight the battles, regardless, because I'm a firm believer in, if you're hiring somebody to do a job, let them do their job. I mean, yes, of course you can say, well, I wanted it to be more this, but don't try to micromanage to the point where, you actually ruin it. And that sometimes can happen, but I'll always put up a good fight, and try to win that over. I've lost on occasions, but it happens. I mean, I'm aware that at the end of the day, it's a job that I'm doing. It's like if I go into a restaurant and I say I want my steak cooked medium well. I mean, personally, I would never have a steak cooked medium well, but and a chef might think that would be a tragedy to overcook a good steak. But hey, if that's what I want, that's what you're supposed to do. I mean, you might come out and argue with me and say, look, it's going to taste much better if you do this. But at the end of the day, the customer is always right, so you have to do that. With Star Wars and Battlefront in particular, both 1 and 2, the amount of oversight is probably the most intimidating thing I've ever dealt with. Every note that I write has to be done. It needs 6 weeks approval time. That's 2 weeks. Well, first of all, that's after EA and DICE and all the developers have approved it. So once we are all happy with it, then it goes through a pipeline of going to Lucasfilm, and there's a team at Lucasfilm that makes sure that whatever I've done is, in their opinion, brand accurate. And then it goes to Disney. 2 weeks at Lucasfilm, 2 weeks at Disney, and then the final 2 weeks it gets kicked down to John Williams. John Williams gets to listen to everything. He has 2 weeks to sign off on it. And if anyone along that chain was to say, well, I don't like that, it gets kicked back and I got to start over. It's a 6 week process. I mean, I've been extremely fortunate in that all but one cue I've ever written for either of those two games has been approved. There was one cue that wasn't, and it was a cue that I wrote for the theme for Jakku, Planet Jakku, like a year before The Force Awakens came out, because I knew zero about what Jakku was, and nobody would tell me. They're like, sorry, we can't tell you anything about this planet because it's extremely important to this new movie, and we cannot give spoilers away. There's an NDA level that you're not on. If you want to know about this planet, I would have to have had a strong box mounted to a cement foundation in my studio that had a hard drive in it, that somebody would come to my house every day, drop the hard drive off, and then at the end of the day come and pick it up. That's the only way I would ever know anything about this planet. That's what I was told. So they told me, think of every type of planet that could possibly be in Star Wars and write an example of each. And I wrote one that was very triumphant and sort of happy and uplifting, and they're like, yeah, that's not Jakku. And that's the only time it was not approved. So. Yeah. I've never, well, no, I was going to say I've never met him, but that's not true. I met him at Costco when I was buying toilet paper. And that's the only time I've ever met him or interacted with him. I was, with that? He wasn't buying toilet paper. I was buying toilet paper. He was there signing CDs with Yo-Yo Ma. I don't know why he was at Costco of all places, but they had just done an album, like a solo cello album. He wrote a bunch of music for it. I walked in there in like my pajamas and a ripped up sweatshirt and to buy toilet paper, and was like, holy shit, there's John Williams. So, what am I going to do? So I went to the CD section and bought my like 8th copy of Jaws, and got in line and got him to sign my copy of Jaws. And that's the only time I've ever met him. I've never spoken to him on the phone. Everything has been completely indirectly. Like his people will talk to my people and tell me, yes or no on cues. But, like I say, I mean, it's only been kicked back once. There was one time I got a note back when I was writing the music for the commercial for the first Battlefront, and I'm pretty positive it wasn't actually a note from John Williams, even though it was told to me that it was. John Williams is saying this, because it was one of the few times that I just straight up ripped off exactly what he did for a string voicing that he used for the Force theme, the Dual Sunset, that theme. There's a string voicing with tremolo, and I was like, well, you know what? That's what everyone seems to want, so I'm just going to do that exact voicing, but I'm going to put my melody. And I got a note back saying he would never voice strings this way, and I thought, well, actually, I hate to tell you, that's pretty much exactly how he voiced it, because I just copied it, And so I said, okay, no problem. I'll go back to the drawing board. And then I wrote like another section of that, project, and sent that in first, got that approved, and then said, hey, here's version 2 of this other thing, which was exactly the version 1. I just sent it again, and they're like, perfect. So, So my theory is that he's not listening to everything, but he still has the courtesy, he can listen if he'd like to. I think once the 2-week period is up, it's considered approved. So he has 2 weeks to listen. Anyone else? Yep. Oh, man. Yes. I'm looking at you, Will, too, because you're involved. Will was involved in this one in particular. Well, actually, I have a bunch, but I'll give a couple. We did this recording session for the Old Republic, where the first recording session we did was actually recorded in Bratislava. And we were recording, we didn't go to Bratislava for the recording session. The orchestra's there, conductor's there. We're monitoring remotely at one of the composer's house in Dillon Beach, California, which is in the middle of absolute nowhere. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's like it was in the middle of nowhere. And first of all, we're all under pressure because we have this other session at Skywalker coming up in a month. So I was writing music during the day because the time difference. The recording session was for us starting at midnight. It's their 9 a.m. or whatever. So I would write all day, till 11 o'clock at night, and then go into the next room and, have to be there remotely for this recording session from midnight till, 8 in the morning, and then repeat, for about 4 days. So that was a nightmare. But then after that whole recording session was over, they sent over the hard drive with all of the Pro Tools sessions, and we received it, and it was blank. And so they had to, it was pretty frightening. We had to send the drive to a clean room to recover all the data off of it or something like that. It was pretty frightening. It was probably more frightening for Mark Grisky, who set up the Bratislava session, than anyone, but because it was his ass. But that was probably the scariest moment. That's the one. I had another one, but now I can't think of it. So come back to me on that. There's been frightening ones, but I can't think of them. Oh yeah, I remember the other one. A session in L.A. For a film that I was working on. It was like a 25-piece orchestra. It was 13 brass and then some strings. And I was doing all the wind sample. There's an orchestral score, but I'm like, here's what we can get away with. I'll do wind sampled, but the brass has to be real because that sounds the worst sampled. And then I'll have just a violin section, and the rest of the strings will be sampled. I show up, and there's no brass section because the contractor misinterpreted what I had said to say that I'm going to do 13 brass players sampled, and I need wind. So I show up and there's 4 wind players and a bunch of violins, and I'm like, well, damn, there's no brass section. So what am I going to do? So we had to reschedule for a week later. Fortunately, I was still able to make the deadline, but that was kind of frightening. I was pretty pissed. Anyone else? Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, man, that game just got tanked. Bad news. It was actually a pretty cool game, and the score I thought was pretty cool too. And it's based on the TV series, which was the only game, I think, Walking Dead game that was based on the AMC series. So loosely, I was told, hey, we wanted to kind of fit into the realm of what Bear was doing for the TV show, musically. And I'm friends with Bear, and so I called him up and I was like, hey man, I'm doing this thing, and what do you do that's special in this thing? He's like, man, just do some bluegrass instruments, man, you'll be good, So that's what I did. And what I ultimately ended up doing is writing a bunch of horror bluegrass music, completely blind, without any reference to the game whatsoever, and recording it and creating a sample library of fiddles doing really creepy stuff, or banjo being played with an ebow, and just doing weird stuff with bluegrass instruments, and using that sort of as I built contact library and used that as sort of the sample library for the whole score. Nothing was recorded live other than a sampling session for that whole score. There's an environment in that game that was in an old abandoned hospital, and my wife works at UCLA medical school, and they're constantly throwing away old medical equipment. And so I told her to bring a bunch of stuff home. So she just brought random stuff home, test tubes, and I would throw them up the cement and record the sound of a bunch of test tubes crashing on the floor, and use that as percussion sound effects. I took scalpels and did sliding them against each other, and made these really cool almost suspended cymbal swells but out of knives, and used that to replace the idea of a sus cymbal swell, that kind of thing. So it was very sort of creative sound effect driven score, Yeah. But it was actually a lot of fun to write. Halfway through writing that score, my wife poked me in the eye, and I got hurt pretty bad and went blind in both eyes for about 6 weeks. And so that kind of made finishing the score pretty tricky. But I managed to somehow or another get through, like one eye completely patched shut, the other eye just like barely squinted open, trying to like see what, which like track I had play enabled, like using all these sample libraries I had created to do this score. So that's a horror story in and of itself, but I managed to finish. So, yeah. Anyone else? Cool. Yep. Well, yeah. I mean, I think. So I sort of have. You say you have an easy time starting, but a hard time finishing. Yeah. I have the opposite problem. I have a hard time starting on anything. I'm ADD. I mean, like you look up attention deficit disorder in the dictionary, and it's got my, there's my face right there. So I have a hard time initiating the process. That to me is much more difficult. But once I get going, I can't be stopped until it's done. But I've met other people that have the similar issue you're talking about, and I think a philosophy to take that would help is understanding that an artist's work is never done until the deadline is hit. So at a certain point, you just have to put your pencil down and stop. I mean, sometimes it's just done. I mean, you look at Stravinsky, writing the Firebird Suite. I mean, it took him, he wrote it, and then he wrote another version 10 years later. Then he wrote another version 20 years after that. It's like, man, if you give people no deadline for something, and they're creative types, it'll ultimately never be done. So the deadline is the greatest tool you can use for finishing something. And if you don't have a deadline, I mean, if you're not on a project, but you're just writing something for yourself, or you're writing something for an album or something along those lines, create self-imposed deadlines, because that helps a lot too, I think. I mean, I have to do that with these projects because, when I'm asked to write, 240 minutes of music and I have 4 months to do it, I mean, that's a lot of music. But you look and you're like, 4 months, man, that's kind of a lot of time. I got some time. If I was to actually believe that, I'd get into month 3 and be like, oh my God, how am I going to write, 3.5 hours of music right now? It's impossible. So I have to set personal deadlines, like by this date and this time, I need to be done with this many minutes, and every day I'm like, by 5 o'clock, I have to have finished the cue, and then by, 10 o'clock at night, it needs to be orchestrated. By the next morning, it has to be delivered for, to do a mock-up. Or, it's like I have to set these little personal deadlines. Otherwise, it'll just go on forever. And, sometimes I hit the deadline, and I don't really feel like I'm finished, but it is what it is, So, yeah. Do you have a question? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've never not made a deadline, miraculously. I've missed my own personal deadlines, and then what happens is I stay up, for nights at a time and get it done. I've also been in a position where I know I might miss a deadline, and that's when I have my team of people that are working with me. I'm like, all right, who wants to write a action cue today? You know what I mean? It's like sometimes that's bringing people in to help you out. It's everyone has done this. It's not unheard of. I mean, get help where you can get help. Just always aim for that pinnacle deadline, because it's, if you miss it, you're just putting yourself further behind. I've never been in a position where I've just like flat out missed and had to like deal with the repercussions of like, a studio being like, I can't believe you missed the deadline. I do have nightmares of that. I mean, I used to have these dreams of like, being like the end of semester and just remembering I was supposed to have been going to a class the whole semester, and like, then I'm sprinting up and down the hallways trying to find where that class is. And now that dream has morphed into showing up to recording sessions and having not one piece of music written. And yeah, so it's certainly possible. I think we need to wrap it up, but thank you all. I really enjoyed it.